The scent of sizzling butter and herbs filled the air as Maria Sanchez wiped down the last table in Luciel's dining room. The restaurant had closed an hour ago, but the kitchen was still alive with activity. Maria paused for a moment, cloth in hand, drawn to the symphony of clanging pots and the rhythmic chopping sounds coming from behind the swinging doors. For 3 years, she had worked as a cleaner at this upscale French restaurant, arriving each evening as the last customers departed and staying long after the kitchen staff had gone home. It wasn't the ideal job, but it paid the bills and offered something money couldn't buy: the chance to observe one of the city's most celebrated chefs at work. Chef Laurent Dubois stood at the center of his kitchen like a conductor before an orchestra, his tall white hat adding to his commanding presence. His sharp voice called out orders that sent his team rushing in different directions. Maria had memorized his movements, the way he tasted sauces with a quick dip of his pinky finger, how he could tell if meat was perfectly cooked with just a gentle press. "This is unacceptable." Chef Laurent's voice boomed through the kitchen, loud enough that Maria could hear it clearly in the dining room. She jumped slightly, nearly knocking over a chair. "How am I supposed to maintain standards when my staff doesn't show up?" Maria inched closer to the kitchen doors, curiosity getting the better of her. Through the small round windows, she could see the chef's face turning red as he waved a piece of paper in the air. "Thomas is sick again. That's the 3rd time this month," he continued, addressing his sous chef, a nervous-looking young man who kept nodding in agreement. "We have a full house tomorrow night and reservations from food critics. This is a disaster." Maria felt a twinge of sympathy. She knew how much pride Chef Laurent took in his restaurant. Luciel had earned its Michelin star 2 years ago, and the pressure to keep it was immense. Turning back to her cleaning cart, Maria tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting to the problem in the kitchen. If only they knew, she thought to herself, gathering dirty napkins from the last table. Cooking wasn't just something Maria enjoyed. It was woven into the fabric of her being. Growing up in a small coastal village in Spain, she had spent countless hours in her grandmother's kitchen, learning recipes passed down through generations. Her abuela had taught her to cook not with precise measurements but with instinct and heart. "The hands remember what the mind forgets," her grandmother would say as Maria helped prepare paella for Sunday family gatherings. Life had taken Maria far from those sun-drenched days in her grandmother's kitchen. At 42, she found herself in a foreign country, working nights as a cleaner, her culinary talents known only to her family and the occasional neighbor who received her homemade dishes during holidays. Her husband Miguel worked long hours as a janitor at the local high school, and together they had managed to put their daughter Ana through her first year of college, the first in their family to pursue higher education. Maria finished wiping down the last table and moved to sweep the dining room floor. As she worked, she hummed quietly, a habit that helped pass the time. The elegant dining room of Luciel, with its crystal chandeliers and pristine white tablecloths, would transform again tomorrow into a bustling haven for the wealthy and the food-obsessed. The kitchen door swung open, and several line cooks emerged, untying their aprons and chatting among themselves. They barely acknowledged Maria as they passed, used to her quiet presence in the late evenings. She didn't mind the invisibility her job afforded her. It allowed her to observe and learn. "We're going to need a miracle to pull off tomorrow's dinner service," one cook said to another as they walked by. "The chef's signature bouillabaisse is on the specials menu, and Thomas is the only one besides the chef who has mastered it." Maria's ears perked up at the mention of bouillabaisse. She had made the French seafood stew countless times, adapting her grandmother's seafood soup recipe to incorporate the traditional Provençal elements. Her version had become a favorite at family gatherings. Just last month, her brother-in-law had declared it better than any restaurant version he'd ever tasted. The rest of the kitchen staff filtered out gradually, nodding politely to Maria as they passed. Chef Laurent was always the last to leave, staying behind to plan the next day's menu and complete orders for fresh ingredients. As Maria moved to the bar area with her broom, she noticed the chef sitting alone at a small table in the corner of the dining room, papers spread out before him, his face etched with worry. Without thinking, Maria reached into her cleaning cart and pulled out a small container. "Excuse me, chef," she said softly, approaching his table with caution. Chef Laurent looked up, seemingly surprised to see her. In 3 years, they had exchanged nothing more than brief greetings. "Yes, what is it?" His tone wasn't unkind, just distracted. I thought you might like to try something, Maria said, placing the container on the table beside his papers. It's just a simple potato tortilla I made for my lunch. I noticed you didn't eat anything tonight. The chef looked at the container, then back at Maria, as if seeing her for the first time. You're Maria, correct? You've worked here for some time. She nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious under his intense gaze. 3 years next month. With a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, Chef Laurent opened the container and inspected its contents. The tortilla, a Spanish omelet filled with potatoes and onions, was cut into neat triangles. After a moment's hesitation, he picked up a piece and took a small bite. Maria held her breath as his expression changed from obligatory politeness to genuine interest. He took another larger bite, chewing thoughtfully. This is quite good, he said, sounding genuinely surprised. The potatoes are perfectly cooked and the balance of salt is excellent. He looked at her with new curiosity. Did you make this? Yes, Maria replied, a small smile forming. It's my grandmother's recipe. Very simple. But she always said the simplest food reveals the true skill of the cook. Chef Laurent nodded slowly, finishing the piece before carefully replacing the lid on the container. Your grandmother was wise. He paused, studying Maria with a new intensity. I overheard my staff talking about tomorrow's predicament. We're short-handed in the kitchen. Maria gathered her courage, sensing an opportunity that might never come again. I could help, she offered, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. In the kitchen, I mean. I've been cooking all my life. For a moment, Chef Laurent's expression remained unreadable. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched upward in what might have been amusement or disbelief. You want to cook? In my kitchen? The way he emphasized my kitchen made it sound like she was offering to pilot a commercial airplane or perform brain surgery. Maria felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment, but she stood her ground. I know I'm just the cleaning lady, she said, her voice quiet but steady. But before I came to this country, I cooked for my family's restaurant back home. It wasn't fancy like Le Ciel, but people came from neighboring villages just to eat there. Chef Laurent leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. His initial surprise had given way to skepticism. And what makes you think you could handle the pressure of a professional kitchen? This isn't home cooking, Maria. We serve sophisticated cuisine to discerning customers. I understand, Maria replied, fighting to keep the disappointment from her voice. It was just a suggestion. I should get back to work. As she turned to leave, Chef Laurent's voice stopped her. The bouillabaisse, Maria turned back. Excuse me? My signature dish, he said, his expression unreadable. You said you overheard the staff talking. Do you know how to make a proper bouillabaisse? Maria nodded slowly. Yes, my grandmother taught me a seafood stew that's similar. Over the years, I've adapted it to be more like the traditional Provençal style. Something flickered in Chef Laurent's eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or challenge. Tomorrow evening, come in 2 hours before your usual time. We'll see what you can do. His tone made it clear he didn't expect much, but was willing to be entertained by the attempt. Thank you. Chef, I won't let you down. Maria's voice was steady, but inside, her heart was racing with a mixture of excitement and terror. As she returned to her cleaning duties, Maria's mind was already whirling with preparations. She would need to call Miguel and ask him to pick up Anna from her evening class. She would need to review the recipe in her mind, making sure she remembered every detail. Most of all, she would need to summon every ounce of confidence she possessed to face the intimidating kitchen of Le Ciel. For the rest of her shift, Maria moved through the restaurant with renewed purpose. Every surface she cleaned, every glass she polished seemed to shine with the promise of tomorrow. For the first time in years, someone might see her, really see her, not as the invisible woman who swept floors and emptied trash, but as the cook she had always been in her heart. As she left the restaurant that night, the cool evening air felt different against her skin, charged with possibility. Tomorrow would either be the beginning of something new or a humiliating reminder of her place. Either way, Maria knew she would face it with the same quiet dignity and passion that had carried her through life's many challenges. She looked back at the darkened windows of Le Ciel, its elegant sign still glowing softly in the night. Tomorrow, she thought, everything might change. Maria arrived at Le Ciel 2 hours earlier than her usual time, just as Chef Laurent had instructed. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the employee entrance at the back of the restaurant. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with preparations and doubts in equal measure. "You can do this," Miguel had told her that morning, squeezing her shoulders reassuringly. "You're the best cook I've ever known. Show them what you can do." His confidence in her had bolstered her courage, but now standing before the heavy metal door, she felt her nerves return with full force. Taking a deep breath, Maria smoothed down her simple black pants and button-up shirt, the nicest clothes she owned, and pushed open the door. The kitchen was already alive with activity, a stark contrast to the quiet space she was accustomed to cleaning each night. Line cooks moved with practiced efficiency, prepping vegetables and checking inventory. The air was filled with the sound of knives against cutting boards and the hiss of water hitting hot pans. For a moment, no one noticed her. Maria stood awkwardly by the door, clutching her small bag containing her grandmother's special wooden spoon, a talisman she had brought for luck. Then a young line cook looked up and frowned in confusion. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron. Before Maria could respond, Chef Laurent's voice cut through the kitchen chatter. "Ah, she's here," he announced, emerging from his office with a clipboard in hand. All activity in the kitchen slowed as heads turned to look first at the chef, then at Maria. "Everyone," Chef Laurent said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement that made Maria's stomach tighten. "This is Maria. She usually cleans our messes, but today she wants to try making them instead." A few chuckles rippled through the kitchen staff. Maria felt her cheeks burn but kept her chin up. Chef Laurent gestured for her to follow him to an empty workstation at the far end of the kitchen. As they walked, Maria could feel the curious stares of the kitchen staff boring into her back. "So, Maria the cleaning lady thinks she can cook," Chef Laurent said, loud enough for nearby staff to hear. He handed her a crisp white apron. "Let's see what you can do with my signature dish, shall we?" Maria accepted the apron with a quiet, "Thank you," tying it around her waist with practiced movements. "The bouillabaisse," Chef Laurent continued, tapping his clipboard. "It's not just about throwing seafood into a pot. It's about technique, timing, and understanding the complex balance of flavors." His tone suggested he was explaining quantum physics to a child. "Are you sure you want to attempt this?" Maria met his gaze steadily. "Yes, chef," she replied simply. A flash of surprise crossed Laurent's face at her use of kitchen protocol, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "Very well." He handed her a printed recipe from his clipboard. "Here are the basic instructions. You'll find all the ingredients in the walk-in. You have 2 hours before service begins." Maria glanced at the recipe, noting that while it contained the same basic elements she was familiar with, fish stock, saffron, fennel, various seafood, there were subtle differences from her own version. The instructions were precise but sparse, clearly written for someone with professional training. "Will Thomas be coming in today?" Maria asked, referring to the sick sous chef. Laurent's expression darkened. "No, he called in sick again. That's why we're resorting to unconventional measures." He gestured vaguely toward Maria. "Consider this an amusing diversion while I figure out how to rearrange tonight's specials menu." With that, he turned and walked away, calling out instructions to other staff members as he moved through the kitchen. Maria stood alone at her station, acutely aware of the sidelong glances and whispered comments from the kitchen staff. A young woman approached, introducing herself as Lucia, one of the line cooks. "Don't mind the chef," she said quietly. "He's stressed about the critics coming tonight." She pointed to the recipe in Maria's hands. "Do you need help gathering the ingredients?" Maria smiled gratefully. "Thank you, but I think I can manage." She set the recipe on the counter and made her way to the walk-in refrigerator, mentally cataloging what she would need. Inside the refrigerator, Maria took a moment to compose herself, the cool air calming her nerves. She had cooked under pressure before. Weekend rushes at her family's small restaurant, big holiday gatherings, her daughter's graduation party, but never with so much scrutiny, never with the eyes of professional chefs watching her every move. "Focus on the food," she whispered to herself, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. "The food doesn't care who cooks it, only how it's treated." With renewed determination, Maria gathered her ingredients: fresh mussels and clams still smelling of the sea, firm white fish, prawns with their heads intact, fennel bulbs, leeks, and tomatoes. She selected fresh herbs, thyme, parsley, bay leaves, and grabbed a small box of expensive saffron threads. Back at her workstation, Maria organized her ingredients methodically. From her bag, she pulled out her grandmother's wooden spoon, worn smooth from decades of use. Running her finger along its familiar curve gave her a sense of calm. "Is that allowed?" a voice asked. Maria looked up to see a young prep cook eyeing her spoon suspiciously. "It's just a spoon," she replied with a smile. "For luck." The prep cook shrugged and returned to his work. Maria tied a kitchen towel around her waist, tucking it into her apron strings the way her grandmother had taught her. Then she began. First, she cleaned the seafood thoroughly, checking each mussel and clam to ensure they were alive and fresh. She filleted the fish with careful precision, her movements economical and practiced. When Chef Laurent passed by, she felt his eyes on her hands but didn't look up, focusing entirely on her work. "Your knife skills aren't terrible," he commented, sounding mildly surprised. Maria nodded in acknowledgement but didn't break her rhythm. She began preparing the broth, sautéing onions, leeks, and fennel until they softened, releasing their sweet aroma into the air. As she worked, she felt a familiar sense of peace settle over her. This, the transformation of simple ingredients into something greater, was where she felt most at home. She added tomatoes to the pot, then reached for the saffron. Pausing, she lifted the small box to her nose, inhaling deeply. The saffron was good quality, but not as fresh as it could be. Without thinking, she adjusted her mental recipe, increasing the amount slightly to compensate. "What are you doing?" Chef Laurent had returned, watching her with narrowed eyes. "The recipe specifies exactly 1/4 teaspoon of saffron." Maria hesitated, then responded honestly. "It's not as fresh as it could be. I'm adjusting for that." Laurent's eyebrows shot up. "You can tell the quality of saffron by smell?" "My grandmother taught me," Maria explained, continuing her work. "She said cooking is about responding to your ingredients, not just following instructions blindly." Laurent watched as she crumbled the saffron threads between her fingers directly into the pot, rather than soaking them first as his recipe instructed. His mouth opened as if to object, then closed again. He remained silent, observing as Maria added the fish stock and a splash of white wine that wasn't in his recipe at all. As the broth simmered, releasing a fragrant steam that drew appreciative sniffs from nearby staff, Maria prepared the rouille, the garlicky saffron mayonnaise traditionally served with bouillabaisse. Here she deviated further from the chef's recipe, adding a roasted red pepper and a hint of smoked paprika, techniques her grandmother had adapted from neighboring Spanish cuisines. Laurent circled her workstation like a hawk, watching each deviation from his recipe with increasing intensity. The kitchen had grown quieter, other staff members stealing glances at the unfolding drama. Maria worked steadily, seemingly oblivious to the attention, but her heart pounded with each improvisation. When it came time to add the seafood, Maria approached the task with reverence. Each type would require different cooking times to reach perfection. She added them in careful sequence. First the firm fish, then the clams and mussels, finally the delicate prawns. The broth bubbled gently, turning a rich reddish gold as it absorbed the essence of the seafood. Chef Laurent leaned in, inhaling deeply. For a moment his professional mask slipped, revealing genuine interest. "That doesn't smell like my bouillabaisse," he said, his tone difficult to read. "No," Maria agreed simply. "It's not exactly the same," Laurent's eyes flashed. "The challenge was to make my signature dish, not create your own version." Maria stirred the pot gently with her grandmother's spoon. "I'm using your ingredients and following the basic technique," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "But cooking comes from the heart as well as the hands. This is your dish." Through my heart, a strange expression crossed Laurent's face, something between irritation and curiosity. He opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by the arrival of Pierre, the maître d'. "Chef, the first of the critics has arrived early," Pierre announced, looking harried. "He's asking about tonight's specials, particularly the bouillabaisse." Laurent glanced at the clock, then at Maria's simmering pot, indecision clear on his face. "How long until it's ready?" he asked her. 10 minutes, Maria replied, adjusting the heat slightly. "The mussels are almost open." Laurent ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from the usually confident chef. "Finish it," he said finally. "I'll come back for the tasting." He turned to Pierre. "Tell him the bouillabaisse is being finished with special care. Offer him a complimentary glass of the Chablis while he waits." As Laurent and Pierre hurried away, Maria felt the full weight of what was happening settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about proving she could cook anymore. Her dish would be served to a food critic, someone whose opinion could affect the restaurant's reputation, Laurent's career, and now her own future. With trembling hands but unwavering focus, Maria completed the final steps of her bouillabaisse. She arranged the seafood in wide, shallow bowls, ladled the rich broth over it, and garnished each with a dollop of her modified roux and a sprinkle of fresh herbs. When Chef Laurent returned, his face was tense with stress. He stopped short at the sight of the finished dishes, their presentation simple but beautiful, the colors vibrant and appetizing. Without a word, he picked up a spoon and tasted the broth directly from the pot. The kitchen fell completely silent as everyone watched for his reaction. For several long seconds, Laurent stood motionless, eyes closed as he processed the flavors. When he opened them again, he looked at Maria with an expression she couldn't read. "Well?" she asked softly, her future hanging on his response. Chef Laurent set down the spoon slowly. "It's different," he said finally. His face remained impassive, but something in his voice had changed. "Very different from mine." Maria's heart sank. "I'm sorry if we'll serve it." Laurent cut her off, his decision apparently made. "Not as my bouillabaisse, but as a special interpretation." He paused, then added reluctantly, "It's good, Maria. Different, but good." He called over 2 servers and instructed them to take the prepared bowls out to the waiting critic and his companions. As the dishes left the kitchen, Laurent turned back to Maria. "Now we wait," he said, his earlier mockery replaced by professional tension. "Let's see if your heart cooking impresses someone whose opinion actually matters in this industry." Maria nodded, untying her apron with unsteady hands. The challenge had been met, but the test was just beginning. The minutes crawled by like hours as Maria stood in the corner of the kitchen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Chef Laurent had returned to overseeing the rest of the dinner service, barking orders and inspecting dishes with his usual precision. But every few minutes his eyes would dart toward the kitchen doors, anticipating the return of the servers who had delivered Maria's bouillabaisse to the waiting critic. "You should help with prep for the other dishes," Lucia whispered as she passed by, carrying a tray of perfectly arranged appetizers. Standing there looking nervous won't help anything. Maria nodded gratefully for the suggestion and moved to an empty prep station. Keeping her hands busy might calm the storm of emotions churning inside her. Chef Laurent glanced at her but didn't object as she began chopping herbs for garnishes, her knife moving with the same skilled precision she had demonstrated earlier. The kitchen's rhythm continued around her, the clatter of pots and pans, the sizzle of meat hitting hot surfaces, the controlled chaos that produced elegant dishes night after night. Maria found comfort in the familiar sounds and smells, so different from the quiet emptiness of the restaurant during her usual cleaning shifts, yet reminiscent of her family's small restaurant back home. 30 minutes passed before Pierre, the maître d', pushed through the swinging doors with a purposeful stride. The entire kitchen seemed to hold its breath as he approached Chef Laurent, leaning in to speak quietly in his ear. Maria couldn't hear the words, but she watched Laurent's expression shift from tense anticipation to surprise. Without a word to his staff, Laurent straightened his chef's coat and followed Pierre back through the doors into the dining room. Maria's heart sank. If the critic had enjoyed her dish, wouldn't Laurent have at least glanced in her direction, perhaps with a nod of acknowledgement? "Don't worry," said a voice beside her. It was Anton, the pastry chef, a kind-faced older man who had been watching the drama unfold while piping delicate cream rosettes onto small chocolate cakes. The chef was called to the dining room. That's usually a good sign. If they hated the food, they just sent it back without comment. Maria tried to smile, but her lips trembled with the effort. "Thank you," she managed to say, continuing to chop herbs with slightly less steady hands. What had she been thinking? Cooking her grandmother's recipes in a Michelin-starred restaurant, deviating from the chef's precise instructions. It had been foolish, perhaps even arrogant. Another 20 minutes passed, each second stretching Maria's nerves tighter. The kitchen staff cast curious glances her way, some sympathetic, others quietly amused by what they assumed was a failed experiment. Maria focused on her work, refusing to meet their eyes, willing herself not to cry. Finally, the kitchen doors swung open once more. Chef Laurent returned, his face unreadable. He scanned the kitchen until his eyes landed on Maria, still dutifully chopping herbs at the prep station. "Maria," he called, his voice cutting through the kitchen noise. "Come with me." Wiping her hands nervously on her apron, Maria followed Laurent into his small office at the back of the kitchen. Her legs felt weak, her mouth dry with anxiety. Was he going to fire her? Even if her cooking experiment had failed, surely he wouldn't dismiss her from her cleaning job. Her family depended on that income. Laurent closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit in the single chair facing his cluttered desk. He remained standing, arms crossed, studying her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the floor. The critic asked to speak with the chef who prepared the bouillabaisse. Laurent said finally, his tone neutral. Maria's eyes widened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was the chef, of course." Laurent's jaw tightened. "What else could I say? That I allowed my cleaning lady to cook for a renowned food critic?" He paced the small office, 3 steps in one direction, 3 steps back. But he knew. Somehow he knew it wasn't my creation. Maria's hands twisted in her lap. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Laurent stopped pacing and leaned against his desk, fixing her with a penetrating stare. "He said it was the best bouillabaisse he has ever tasted in this city." The words hung in the air between them. Maria blinked, certain she had misheard. "He what?" he said. Laurent repeated slowly, "that it was the best he's ever tasted." He detected influences that were not purely French, something Spanish perhaps. His eyebrow raised in question. "My grandmother was from a coastal village near Valencia," Maria explained, her voice barely audible. She added her own touches to traditional recipes. Laurent nodded as if confirming a suspicion. He said the dish showed soul, that it respected tradition while bringing something fresh and personal. His voice held a strange mix of emotions, professional admiration tinged with something that might have been envy. "He wants to meet you," Laurent continued. "I told him the chef who prepared the dish was unavailable, but he insisted. He's coming back tomorrow night specifically to try more of the new chef's creations." Maria stared at him, speechless. The critic was coming back, tomorrow, to try more of her cooking? The thought sent a wave of panic through her. "But I'm not a chef," she protested. "I was just trying to help because you were short-staffed. I can go back to cleaning and you can tell him there was a misunderstanding." "No," Laurent cut her off sharply. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Maria was beginning to recognize as a sign of his internal struggle. "He's bringing the editor of Cuisine Monthly with him. If they write about discovering an untrained cleaner with extraordinary talent in my kitchen." He shook his head. "It could be either a public relations disaster or a marketing miracle." Maria sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything. Her simple attempt to help had somehow spiraled into this impossible situation. "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. Laurent studied her for a long moment. "Can you cook other dishes besides bouillabaisse?" "Yes," Maria answered without hesitation. "Many things. My grandmother taught me everything she knew, and I've learned more over the years." Laurent nodded slowly, his decision apparently made. "Tomorrow you come in early again. We'll test a few dishes together, if they're good enough." He paused, seemingly struggling with the words. "If they're good enough, you'll cook for the critic tomorrow night." Maria's heart leaped into her throat. "But the other kitchen staff and will do as I say," Laurent finished firmly. "You'll be introduced as a private chef I've been mentoring. It's not entirely a lie. I am a chef, and you did cook here privately today." The ghost of a smile flickered across his face, so briefly that Maria might have imagined it. Before she could respond, a sharp knock came at the office door. "Chef," called an urgent voice from outside. "The fish for table 7 is burning." Laurent's professional mask snapped back into place. "We'll discuss details later," he told Maria as he headed for the door. "For now, you can continue helping with prep. The staff will assume I'm putting you to work as punishment." He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "And Maria, don't tell anyone about this conversation." "Not yet." With that, he was gone, leaving Maria alone in the small office, her world turned upside down in the span of a single evening. When she finally emerged, the kitchen was in full dinner service chaos. Maria slipped back to her prep station, following Lucia's instructions on which herbs to chop and vegetables to dice. The routine work allowed her mind to process everything that had happened. The critic had loved her bouillabaisse. He wanted to try more of her cooking. And Chef Laurent, the intimidating perfectionist Chef Laurent, was going to let her cook again tomorrow. "Is everything okay?" Lucia asked, noticing Maria's dazed expression. "Did the chef fire you?" Maria shook her head. "No, I'm still here. What did he say about your dish?" Lucia pressed, genuine curiosity in her eyes. Remembering Laurent's instructions, Maria just shrugged. He had some feedback. Lucia looked disappointed at the non-answer, but had to rush off to plate a dessert, leaving Maria to her thoughts once more. As the dinner service continued, Maria observed the kitchen with new eyes. She noticed details she had missed before. The way Chef Laurent communicated with subtle nods and gestures, how the line cooks anticipated each other's movements, the precise timing that ensured each component of a dish was ready exactly when needed. If she was going to cook here again tomorrow, she would need to understand these rhythms, this dance of culinary professionals. By the time the last dishes were served and the kitchen began cleaning up, exhaustion had settled deep in Maria's bones. She hadn't realized how physically demanding kitchen work could be, so different from her usual cleaning routine, despite both being forms of physical labor. As the staff began to disperse, Chef Laurent approached her once more. 7 a.m. tomorrow, he said quietly. "We'll need the morning to prepare. Can you make arrangements for your other responsibilities?" Maria thought quickly. She would need to call Miguel, ask him to handle the morning routine with Anna, perhaps see if her sister could cover her afternoon cleaning job at the office building downtown. "Yes, Chef," she replied, the formal address coming naturally now. "I'll be here," Laurent nodded. "Good, and bring your wooden spoon," he added, a trace of reluctant amusement in his voice. Apparently it's good luck. As Maria left the restaurant that night, the cool evening air felt different on her skin, not charged with mere possibility as it had been the night before, but heavy with the weight of unexpected opportunity. She walked faster than usual, eager to get home and tell Miguel everything, her mind already racing with ideas for tomorrow's dishes. The streets were quiet. Most shops closed for the night, but Maria's thoughts were anything but silent. What would she cook tomorrow? What if the critic didn't like her other dishes as much as the bouillabaisse? What if this was her one chance to step out of the shadows and into the light of a dream she had long ago set aside? One thing was certain. Whether tomorrow ended in triumph or disaster, Maria Sanchez was no longer invisible. For better or worse, she had been seen. Maria arrived at Le Ciel at exactly 7 the next morning, having barely slept the night before. Miguel had listened to her story with wide-eyed amazement, then immediately started rearranging their family schedule to accommodate her unexpected opportunity. "This is what you've always deserved," he had told her, kissing her forehead. "Show them who you really are." The restaurant was eerily quiet as she pushed open the employee entrance. The dining room, which would later be filled with elegant patrons and soft music, sat in shadow, chairs upturned on tables. Only a single light illuminated the kitchen, where Chef Laurent was already at work, his white coat crisp and spotless. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You're on time," he noted, sounding mildly surprised. "Good." Maria nodded, removing her coat to reveal the simple black pants and white shirt she had worn the day before, the closest thing she owned to a chef's uniform. From her bag, she carefully extracted her grandmother's wooden spoon, wrapped in a clean kitchen towel. "I made a list," Laurent said without preamble, sliding a piece of paper across the stainless steel work surface. "These are the dishes the critics might expect. We need to decide what you'll prepare." Maria scanned the list, classic French dishes with complex preparations and elegant presentations. Her heart sank slightly. While she was confident in her cooking, many of these sophisticated French techniques were unfamiliar to her. "I don't know how to make all of these," she admitted, looking up at Laurent. "My cooking is simpler, more from the heart than from formal training." Laurent studied her for a moment. "Then what would you suggest?" "The critic is expecting something special," Maria thought carefully. "What if we create a menu that tells a story? Dishes that show where I come from, but with the refinement of Le Ciel." She hesitated, then added, "Dishes that combine your technical skill with my heart cooking, as you called it." Something flickered in Laurent's eyes. Interest, perhaps, or challenge. "Give me 3 dishes," he said. "Starter, main, dessert, without hesitation. Maria described a starter of seared scallops with a saffron-infused cauliflower puree and crispy jamin, a dish that honored both Spanish and French traditions. For the main course, she suggested a herb-crusted rack of lamb with a rich red wine reduction and her grandmother's special patatas, a la pobre, poor man's potatoes, elevated with truffle oil and fresh herbs. Finally, for dessert, a modern take on traditional Spanish flan, infused with lavender and paired with caramelized orange segments. As she spoke, Laurent's expression gradually shifted from skepticism to genuine interest. He asked pointed questions about techniques and flavor combinations, challenging her ideas but not dismissing them outright. The scallops need something acidic to balance the richness, he noted. And the lamb should be accompanied by something green, perhaps a puree of spring peas. Maria nodded, appreciating his expertise. Yes, that would add color and freshness. For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side, testing recipes and adjusting flavors. To Maria's surprise, Laurent was a patient teacher when he chose to be, demonstrating the precise French techniques that would elevate her rustic cooking to the level expected at Le Ciel. No. Like this, he said, showing her how to properly sear the scallops to achieve the perfect golden crust while keeping the center tender. Count to exactly 30 seconds, then turn. Not before, not after. Maria absorbed every instruction, adapting quickly. In turn, Laurent watched with barely concealed curiosity as she prepared her grandmother's potato dish, using a technique he had never seen to achieve a texture both crispy and creamy. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked as she added a splash of stock at exactly the right moment. "My grandmother," Maria replied, a soft smile playing at her lips. "She always said cooking is about listening to the food. It tells you what it needs if you pay attention." Laurent made a non-committal sound, but he observed her technique carefully, making mental notes. By mid-morning, other kitchen staff began to arrive, their surprise evident at finding Maria working alongside the chef. Laurent addressed their unspoken questions with his usual brisk efficiency. "Maria will be preparing special dishes for the critic tonight," he announced. "She will have full use of Station 3. Any ingredients she needs are to be provided immediately." His tone left no room for questions or objections. The staff exchanged glances but quickly fell into the day's prep routines. Only Lucia dared to approach Maria during a quiet moment. "What happened?" she whispered. "Yesterday you were washing floors, today you're cooking for critics." Maria shrugged, remembering Laurent's instruction for discretion. "Life is full of surprises," she said simply. As the day progressed, word spread throughout the restaurant. By afternoon, even the front-of-house staff were finding excuses to peek into the kitchen, curious about the cleaning lady who had somehow earned a spot at one of the cooking stations. Through it all, Maria remained focused on her preparations. The nervousness she had felt the previous day had transformed into a deep concentration. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about honoring her grandmother's legacy, about showing that cooking with love was as valid as cooking with technical precision. Laurent, meanwhile, divided his attention between overseeing the regular dinner preparations and checking on Maria's progress. More than once, she caught him watching her with an expression that had shifted from skepticism to something closer to professional respect. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen was operating at full capacity. The evening's reservations were fully booked, with the critic and editor scheduled to arrive at 8. Maria's mise en place was meticulously arranged at her station. Every ingredient prepped, every sauce prepared, every garnish ready for final assembly. "Are you ready?" Laurent asked, appearing suddenly at her side. Maria took a deep breath. "Yes, chef." He nodded, then added in a lower voice, "Remember what we discussed. You're being introduced as a private chef I've been mentoring. If asked, you've been working with me for 6 months. Nothing about cleaning." "I understand," Maria assured him. At precisely 8 o'clock, Pierre appeared in the kitchen, his face composed but his eyes betraying excitement. "They're here," he announced. "Table 12. Laurent straightened his chef's jacket. "Send the amuse-bouche immediately, then the first course in 15 minutes. He glanced at Maria. "Begin the scallops now." With steady hands, Maria began the dish that would introduce her cooking to the critics. The kitchen around her hummed with activity, but she remained in a bubble of concentration, every movement precise, every decision deliberate. When the scallops were perfectly seared, She arranged them on warmed plates atop the golden cauliflower puree, then added the crispy jamin and a small drizzle of herb oil. Laurent inspected the dishes before they left the kitchen, his critical eye searching for flaws. Finding none, he nodded to the servers. "Tell them this is a special creation from our newest chef," he instructed, her interpretation of Spanish-French coastal cuisine. As the plates left the kitchen, Maria felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened now was out of her hands. She had cooked with all the skill and heart she possessed. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Between preparing her special menu items, Maria helped where needed with other orders, falling naturally into the rhythm of the kitchen. The staff, initially wary, began to accept her presence as they witnessed her skill and work ethic. When it came time for dessert, Laurent himself delivered the plates to table 12, an unusual move that raised eyebrows among the staff. He returned several minutes later, his expression unreadable. "They want to meet you," he said to Maria. "Now." Maria wiped her hands on her apron, sudden anxiety gripping her. "What did they say about the food?" "You'll hear it from them," Laurent replied. "Come." Heart-pounding, Maria followed Laurent through the swinging doors into the dining room. The restaurant was full, the ambient noise of conversation and clinking glasses creating a sophisticated hum. At table 12 sat 2 men in expensive suits, both middle-aged with the well-fed look of professional food critics. As Maria approached, they stood, a mark of respect that took her by surprise. "Gentlemen," Laurent said formally, "may I present Maria Sanchez, the chef responsible for your meal this evening." The older of the 2 men extended his hand. "Philippe Dumont," he introduced himself, "food critic for Le Gourmet magazine? And this is Henri Blanc, editor of Cuisine Monthly." Maria shook their hands, acutely aware of her calloused palms against their smooth ones. "Ms. Sanchez," Dumont said, his tone warm with admiration, "your cooking is extraordinary. The bouillabaisse yesterday was a revelation, but tonight's menu—" He pressed his fingertips to his lips in a gesture of pure appreciation. "You have a gift that cannot be taught." "The harmony of Spanish soul and French technique," added Blanc, nodding in agreement. "It's unlike anything currently being done in this city." Maria felt a flush of pleasure warm her cheeks. "Thank you," she said simply. "I cook the way my grandmother taught me, with respect for the ingredients and love for those who will eat the food." The men exchanged glances. "Chef Laurent tells us he's been mentoring you," Dumont said, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "Yet your style is distinctly different from his." Maria glanced at Laurent, unsure how to respond without revealing the truth. To her surprise, Laurent stepped forward. "Maria brings her own perspective," he said smoothly. "The best mentors know when to teach and when to learn. Her approach has challenged some of my own assumptions about cooking." The critics seemed satisfied with this answer. Blanc pulled out a business card and handed it to Maria. "We would like to feature you in next month's issue," he said, a rising star with a unique culinary voice. Maria accepted the card with trembling fingers. "I would be honored," she managed to say, though the words felt inadequate for the emotions swelling in her chest. As they walked back to the kitchen, Maria felt lightheaded with the sudden turn her life had taken. Laurent was unusually quiet beside her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me this chance." Laurent stopped just before the kitchen doors. "You earned it," he said finally, his professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine respect. "What happens next is entirely up to you." 6 months later, Maria stood in the kitchen of Luciel, directing the final touches on the evening's special menu. The pristine chef's coat she wore still felt strange against her skin, a daily reminder of how dramatically her life had changed. She watched as a young line cook carefully arranged edible flowers on a plate of seared scallops. The same dish that had first impressed the critics, now a customer favorite. "More color on the left side," Maria suggested gently. "Remember, we eat first with our eyes." The cook nodded, adjusting the presentation with careful fingers. Maria smiled, remembering her own nervousness in those first weeks after the critics' visit. The transition from cleaning staff to sous chef had not been easy, for her or for the rest of the kitchen. Some staff members had resented her sudden rise, whispering that she had simply gotten lucky, or that Laurent had ulterior motives. Others had been skeptical of her lack of formal training. But as weeks passed, her consistent performance and humble approach had won over even the most doubtful colleagues. Maria, called Laurent from his office. A moment, please. She wiped her hands on her apron and made her way through the busy kitchen. The dinner service was about to begin, and the energy in the room was at its peak. That perfect tension between excitement and focus that preceded every successful evening at Le Ciel de Laurent's office had changed little in the past months. Still cramped, still cluttered with cookbooks and invoices, but the man himself had undergone a subtle transformation. The harsh edge to his voice had softened, and the permanent furrow between his brows had eased. He looked up from a stack of papers as Maria entered. "The food critic from the Globe is coming tonight," he said without preamble. "He's heard about our Spanish-French fusion and wants to experience it himself." Maria nodded, taking this news in stride. Once, the thought of cooking for prominent critics would have terrified her. Now it was simply part of her new reality. "Shall I prepare the special tasting menu?" she asked. Laurent considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "Create something new," he decided. "Something that represents where we are now. Not just your heritage or my techniques, but what we've created together." Maria felt a warm glow of pride at his words. The we represented the most remarkable aspect of the past 6 months, the gradual evolution of their professional relationship from skepticism to grudging respect to genuine collaboration. Laurent had taught her the precision and discipline of French cuisine, while she had reminded him of the soul and instinct that had drawn him to cooking in the first place. "I'll think about it right away," she promised. As she turned to leave, Laurent added, "The magazine article comes out tomorrow." Maria paused, her hand on the doorknob. The feature in Cuisine Monthly had grown from a simple profile into an extensive spread about her unusual journey. The writer had been fascinated by her story, the cleaning lady whose exceptional talent had transformed a Michelin-starred restaurant. "Are you nervous?" Laurent asked, a rare personal question from the typically professional chef. Maria considered this. "A little," she admitted. "For my family, mostly. Our life has been private until now." Laurent nodded in understanding. "Fame changes things," he said simply. "Not always for the better. Remember who you are at your core, Maria. That's what makes your cooking special." The unexpected depth of this advice stayed with Maria as she returned to the kitchen. 6 months ago, she would never have imagined Chef Laurent offering her personal wisdom, but their shared passion for food had gradually bridged the gap between their vastly different backgrounds. As the dinner service began, Maria moved through her now familiar routine with confidence. She tasted sauces, adjusted seasonings, and inspected each plate before it left the kitchen. Between tasks, her mind worked on Laurent's challenge, a dish that would represent their combined philosophy. During a brief lull, she stepped into the walk-in refrigerator for a moment of quiet reflection. The cool air helped clear her thoughts as she surveyed the available ingredients, looking for inspiration. Her eyes fell on a tray of fresh sea bass, delivered that morning from the coast. Beside it sat locally foraged mushrooms and the first spring vegetables, from the farm that supplied Le Ciel. Something clicked in her mind, a dish that would honor both the French, respect for premium ingredients, and the Spanish tradition of letting natural flavors speak for themselves. Back in the kitchen, Maria quickly sketched the dish in her notebook, a technique Laurent had insisted she adopt to document her creative process. Sea bass, pan-seared with crispy skin, served atop a delicate saffron and shellfish broth. Around it, a mosaic of spring vegetables, each prepared to highlight its essential character, and as a final touch, an airy espuma of mushroom, a modern technique that Laurent had recently taught her. When she showed the concept to Laurent between courses, he studied it with his usual intensity. "The fish needs a counterpoint," he suggested. "Perhaps a citrus element." Maria nodded, appreciating the refinement. "Preserved lemon in the broth," she decided, "and a few drops of herb oil to finish." Laurent's lips curved in a slight smile, his version of enthusiastic approval. "Make a test plate first," he instructed. "We'll taste it together before sending it to the critic." As the evening progressed, Maria prepared her creation with meticulous care, balancing the flavors until they harmonized perfectly. The dish came together beautifully, elegant yet approachable, sophisticated yet comforting. When she presented the test plate to Laurent, he tasted it in thoughtful silence. "This is who we are now," he said finally, indicating the dish with a small gesture. "Send it with my personal compliments." The critic's reaction exceeded even their hopeful expectations. He requested to meet both chefs, an unusual move that sent a ripple of excitement through the restaurant. Standing side by side in the dining room, Maria and Laurent accepted his effusive praise with professional grace. "The harmony of your styles is remarkable," the critic told them. "It's rare to find two chefs whose talents complement each other so perfectly." Later that night, as the staff cleaned up after service, Maria found a quiet moment to call home. Miguel answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "How did it go?" he asked, the pride evident in his voice. "Wonderful," Maria told him, unable to keep the smile from her face. The critic loved it. "And Laurent and I, we worked well together." "Of course you did," Miguel replied. "He finally sees what I've always known, that my wife is the most talented chef in the city." Maria laughed softly. "Hardly that," she demurred, though his unwavering support still warmed her heart after all these years. "But things are good, Miguel. Really good." After hanging up, Maria finished her closing duties and prepared to leave. As she collected her things from the staff room, she noticed something unusual on the bulletin board, a framed copy of the restaurant's original menu from 5 years ago, when Laurent had first opened Le Ciel. Beside it hung a new menu hot off the press, featuring several of Maria's creations prominently displayed. "A reminder," said Laurent's voice from the doorway, "of where we started and how far we've come." Maria studied the two menus side by side. "It's been quite a journey," she agreed. "From cleaning your floors to cooking your food." "Our food," Laurent corrected her. He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about the future of Le Ciel. The second Michelin star is within reach now, thanks to the new direction." Maria nodded. The restaurant's popularity had soared in recent months, with reservations booked solid 3 months in advance. Critics had praised the innovative menu that blended French precision with Spanish soul, and regular customers had embraced the change enthusiastically. "I'd like to make your position permanent," Laurent continued, "as partner chef. Equal billing on the menu and the sign. From Le Ciel by Laurent Dubois to Le Ciel by Dubois and Sanchez." Maria stared at him, momentarily speechless. "But it's your restaurant," she managed finally. "Your name, your reputation." Laurent shrugged, a gesture so casual it belied the significance of his offer. "A restaurant is more than a name. It's about the food, the experience, the heart." He seemed slightly uncomfortable using her terminology, but pressed on. "Your contribution deserves recognition." "I don't know what to say," Maria admitted. "Say yes," Laurent suggested, the corner of his mouth lifting in a rare display of humor. "Unless you'd prefer to go back to cleaning?" Maria laughed, shaking her head at the absurdity of how far they'd come. "From a joke to a partnership," she marveled. "Life takes strange turns." "Indeed it does," Laurent agreed. "So, partners?" He extended his hand formally. Maria looked at his outstretched hand, thinking of all that had happened since that first night when she had dared to suggest she could cook. She thought of her grandmother, who had taught her that cooking was an expression of love. She thought of Miguel and Ana, whose support had never wavered. And she thought of her younger self, who had put aside her dreams to build a stable life for her family, never imagining that those dreams might one day be reclaimed. "Partners," she agreed, clasping his hand firmly. As they walked out together into the quiet night, the restaurant dark behind them, Maria felt a profound sense of completeness. The journey had been unexpected and challenging, but it had led her back to her true self, the chef she had always been at heart. From cleaning lady to chef partner, from invisibility to recognition, from suppressed talent to celebrated artistry, Maria Sanchez had finally come home to herself. And Le Ciel, once Laurent's singular vision, had become something greater, a place where tradition met innovation, where technique met soul, and where the humble wisdom of a grandmother's kitchen had transformed fine dining forever.